Hi, my name is Sherwin Lai of the class of 2020. I'm the Interp captain at Bellarmine for the 2019 to 20 school year, and today I have a video for you about how to cut a script in Interp. Now, if we zoom back out and take a look at the entire Interp process, we start with a new season, of course, and the first step, as usual, is to find a script, and you select a text suitable for you and your audience, obviously. Now, I go over more detail about kind of what to look for scripts in the Unit B videos. So if you have questions about those, go ahead and check those out. Today's video is going to be more focused on the next step, script cutting. Assuming that you've already picked and chosen a script, how do we take that original script and cut it down to a 10-minute presentation that is easy to follow and dynamically effective, right? That's what we're going to be focusing on today. Of course, after you cut your script, you memorize it, go through coaching, practice and polish, and then compete and repeat the process. And again, today we're going to focus on just that cutting portion. Now, there are a few things to keep in mind when we're trying to cut. First, we want to end up with something with just one major storyline. Instead of trying to include all the juicy parts of your original script, which ends up meaning you try to include every side story, which isn't effective because it distracts from the main plot arc, right? Your job is to kind of figure out one dramatic plot arc, one kind of storyline, one kind of conflict narrative. Of course, it can be complex, right? But what we want to do is just avoid trying to include every detail or every major plot point from the script, rather just sample the most important parts that will help you build. What you want to do is focus on the climax, the most critical point of your speech, and think about how you're going to build to that point. And then based on that climax, find parts to fill in the rising action, falling action, and the rest of the speech. But you really want to be thinking about your climax even when you start cutting a script, even though it comes later in the piece. With regards to characters, it's totally okay, and actually I would recommend that you eliminate or combine unnecessary characters. This means that in a DI or a dramatic piece, if, for example, or an OI actually, if you just want to focus on one monologue, you're totally able to remove other characters, remove some dialogue if it works, right? And just focus on that one monologue, which often is more effective. In HI, often this means, your original script has maybe 15 to 20 characters. That's way too many, right? Just cut out the lines, cut out the sections where you have characters that aren't as important or might get mixed up with. You can also, and this is a bit more tricky and it's a gray area, but you can also combine different characters into the same character if they work, but obviously you have to think if it logically makes sense. So definitely check with your captains or coaches on that one. Humor. Super important. Even if your piece is dramatic in nature, like in DI, POI, your OPP, duo, you should always include humor, especially in the first half, to kind of help bring in some relatability to the character. If you watch my characterization video later in this video series, I kind of talk about this idea where, especially in DI, you want to make the audience really like your character. Often humor is an effective way of doing this, but you want to make them like the character and feel connected to it, so that when something really bad happens to that character or they die, people feel sorry for that character or they feel sad, right? So that's the important part. You can't really have the depressing drama without some kind of relatability or connection with the character, and humor is often a good way to accomplish that. You always want to be thinking about characterization, right? You're not just including lines for like purely dramatic effects. You want to think about how the lines might come together, be more cohesive, and you can create some kind of either one central character if you're doing a monologue piece, or a multitude of characters if you want to find things that will help you distinguish between the different characters. That's something to think about. You always want to think about blocking. Leave room for blocking in your piece. Think about opportunities where you can add physical motion to it. And allow your piece to have a dynamic emotional range as well. time. This is really important. Even though we're cutting to a 10-minute presentation, 10-minute max, you actually want to aim for around 8 minutes and 15 seconds. This is true for a couple reasons. First, you will eventually need to add the introduction, which can take somewhere from 30 seconds to 45 seconds. You also want to keep in mind that you will add blocking and more emotional variation later and transition stuff. Those all take up time that will not be accounted for initially. And finally, it's just that when you initially time your speech to figure it out, you often tend to go faster than when you actually perform, because when you actually perform, you're putting in a lot more like emotions and blocking and all of that, right? So usually your timing is an underestimate. So that's why I'd say lean towards 8:15 or even lower to be safe. And again, we don't want to end up with like exactly 10-minute presentation anyway. It should be around 9:30-ish, 9:45. There's a trick you're allowed to use, and that's you can repeat or reorder lines. So if you want to say a line multiple times, you're allowed to just copy it multiple times and re-highlight it when you turn in, right? You're also allowed to reorder things. So maybe there's something in the script that comes up near the beginning, but you think it's more dramatic and might make more sense for the climax later in the speech, right? You're allowed to move that around. Finally, remember, keep in mind there is a 150 added words limit in California, including the intro. So you want to leave room for that. Don't use up all of the words in your cutting. All right. So here's kind of how I lay out the process. The first pass is you read the entire original source. Notice I emphasize entire, right? So if you're cutting a 3-act play, but you only want to include 1 act, you still need to read the whole play, right? Don't just read that one section. If you're cutting from like a specific portion of a book, right, or maybe a few chapters, you still want to read the entire book. This is so you can make sure you understand the entire context, right? You understand the characterization, the bigger development. Even though you might be focusing on a smaller portion of the entire work, you still want to have that baseline understanding. So it is super critical that you read the entire original source. There's no way around this, so just spend some time doing it. Next, you want to start underlining, highlighting, or bracketing parts of your script that you may want to include. Now, obviously, you probably don't want to write directly on the source, so either make photocopies, do it on OneNote if you scan it, or find a digital version, right? So when you're reading through, or after you're reading through, just go through the original source, kind of mark down the places where you might think it might fit into the script. Don't worry about marking too many places yet, because this is just the preliminary stage of the cutting, right? Just put down everything that you think might work. The next stage is that then you actually want to cut down to that 8:15 time mark, right? So what you would do is photocopy all the pages where you have lines, or if it's an online source, print them out, right? And then underline or highlight. I'll show you an example in a moment. So underline the lines that appear in your script. And you only want to include the pages where you have lines, not the whole book, right? Again, if a line comes up more than once, or you need to reorder something, just make multiple copies of that page. And finally, once you have all that photocopy highlight done, you would open up a Word doc or Google Doc and just type up all the lines in your document, the order you would perform them, obviously excluding everything you cut out, right? This document will help you memorize later, write down blocking notes throughout the season, and of course you would probably update it later if you need to update your script between tournaments. So anyway, 4-step process. Read the entire original source, not just the chapter, not just the section, not just the act, the entire thing. Do a quick underline or highlight or bracketing of parts, the original source you want to include. Then you do the photocopies and the highlighting, and then finally type up all your lines. Let's look at some examples. So both of these are ones I've personally done. So the one on the left is from a DI. It is a DI, sorry. It's from a play, which is a book. So you can see on this page, I have lines. So I've photocopied the page and I've highlighted the lines that I'm going to perform in that order. So that's what I would do. And of course, the stuff that isn't highlighted, I am not saying. You'll also notice that there's multiple characters, but I'm only focusing on like the narrator character. So I've cut out the sock character, for example, right? So that's something you might want to consider doing in a DI. Now this one's a bit different. This one's from an OI. If you've noticed, this is actually a printout from a web page, a TED transcript, right? And similarly, I've highlighted and underlined. Actually, the underlining is the inserted words. So if you're going to add words into your script, make sure you use a caret, neatly write them, and then you underline them. So yeah, that's about it for this video. Hopefully you found those tips helpful on cutting. It is a process that takes longer than most people think, but ultimately depends on how long your original source is, how complex you want your script to be. As always, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask your captains, your coaches, or even me, myself. That's about it. Thank you for watching.